Today we've got a very important, timely, and meaty discussion around Islamophobia. What it is, what it's not, and the dark circle and network of people who are promoting hate and misinformation about Islam. So one important thing when we talk about Islamophobia, and that's not my preferred term, by the way. I have mixed feelings about the term Islamophobia. This is discussed actually by Dr. Wamer Enjum. He was talking about in the 2010s when scholars were considering about how to describe this phenomenon, which is orchestrated disinformation or misinformation against Muslims, often inciting violence and hatred. What should we call it? And one group of people, they were saying, well, we should call it Islamophobia because that is something that is going to be legible or something that is understandable or sensible. It ties into racism and it's going to be more understandable than if we try to portray discrimination or this organized hate as something that's targeting our religion, which is something that you may freely choose. Obviously, that's also the shortcoming. So maybe you could say that the pro or the advantage of calling it Islamophobia is that you are trying to meet the average American person where they're at and trying to give them sort of something to compare it to in their mind. The drawback, obviously, is that Islam is not a race, nor should it be construed as a race. Islam is for everybody, and it's contributed, unfortunately, to this foreignization of Islam, that Islam can only be, it's only the Middle Eastern person, or it's only the person from somewhere outside, as opposed to the generations of Muslims that have lived in the United States of America. And there's also concerns that the term Islamophobia is too broad, that it includes things that should not be considered Islamophobia. And we're going to get to that right now. So what Islamophobia is not, or what it shouldn't be, one of the things is that Islamophobia should not be used for mere ignorance about Islam. We're talking about doing dawah in a non-Muslim country like the United States of America, Canada, most of the countries of Europe, that we have to assume that the average person is not going to have a lot of information about Islam. And when they don't have any information, or when they have a lot of misinformation, people are going to think some very wild things, right? They might have heard this or heard that. And if they express that to you, asking about it, seeking clarification, that's not Islamophobia. We have to, I think, resist the temptation to subscribe to this microaggression culture. Not saying there's no such thing as microaggressions, but we need to understand that as Muslims who do da'wah, who are supposed to invite people to Islam and clarify what Islam is, you have to expect that, right? And you have to have a certain thickness of skin in order to tolerate that. That should be expected, and nobody should come and say, oh, this is Islamophobia because this person didn't understand exactly like what Islam is, or they had some misinformation, even if they're kind of get heated about it. Because some people, if they hear that, oh, Islam practices X, or if Islam believes Y, it might genuinely upset them. And so I don't think that it's necessarily appropriate to label every single scenario like that Islamophobia and use it to try to just silence people. We want dialogue. We want engagement. We want to clarify what Islam is. And we would rather have people come to you or me to ask for clarification than go to some of the clowns and phonies that I'm going to talk about in the rest of this video. The second situation that we should not, in my opinion, use the term Islamophobia to cover is people who have objections to Islam, whether it's beliefs or practices. And now we're saying, let's imagine that there is not misinformation going on or not ignorance going on. Somebody says that they know that in Islam, the punishment for X is Y, or that you have to pray 5 times a day. Some people even object to fasting, right? Especially if you're a young person and you come to maturity, you reach puberty by the age of 13 or 14. There are many people in America that don't think that a person of that age is ready to fast for an entire day. They see that as too much. If someone has a genuine opposition or objection to Islamic belief and practice, I don't believe that we should call that Islamophobia. That person is allowed to disagree, that we don't have la ikraha fi din. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we do not believe in forced conversions, obviously, despite what many Islamophobes would like to say. And we also don't believe in trying to silence all criticism of Islam if people find that objectionable. We don't want to silence people and act like you have to just like it. And this is another temptation where we don't want people to just be fake and phony and really underneath they're resentful because now they have to pretend like they like everything about Islam. I don't think that we should go that route. People are allowed to have objections and criticisms of Islamic faith and practice, and we live with that. We negotiate around that. And the final thing, and I think that this is relevant, that we should not use Islamophobia to describe is when people try to hold Muslims accountable for how they act in society. As Muslims, we do have a responsibility to contribute to our societies, to be a value-adding member of society, to contribute and to help other people. And if people call us out on not doing that, then we can't, let me put it this way, we should resist the temptation to run to, oh, this is just Islamophobia, oh, this person is bigoted, this person has hatred for us. I don't believe that that's true. And there's a huge caveat to this, which is the coordinated campaign to feed these fears. We're going to talk about that. That's most of this video. But we shouldn't shy away from accountability when the shoe fits, when the criticism is accurate, when we haven't contributed enough to our local communities as we should have. So what do we mean when we talk about Islamophobia? Islamophobia is the deliberate misrepresentation of Islam for political and financial gain. It is often done to promote hatred and incite violence. Now, what we want to distinguish here clearly is that not everybody who is against Islam or against Muslims is a good faith actor. Not every objection to Islamic belief or practice or even misunderstanding of it is done in good faith. Sometimes it is done with malice. Sometimes it is done with a lot of money behind it and a lot of power behind it and a lot of coordination behind it, even involving foreign governments. Yeah, we're going to get there. So this psyop, right? This attempt to smear Islam, this attempt to portray Islam as something that is violent, as something that is dangerous, as something that is a threat, is Islamophobia. And it's important to know that Islamophobia, and this is where probably I also disagree with using this terminology, because when you use Islamophobia, it almost makes it seem like, oh, it's just this individual bigot who has some sort of opinion. This is a coordinated campaign. This is a very sophisticated operation in order to portray Islam as a threat. And there's reasons for why that is a coordinated campaign and who benefits. But let's get into the structure of the thing. Now, all the research that went into this video, there are several sources. The Center for American Progress has two good reports, one called Fear Inc., and then they had a second one, Fear Inc. 2.0. CARE has done some really good research on it and has released some PDFs as well that you should, if you want to go really deep into the weeds, then I recommend that you follow up with that. I am summarizing for you a lot of those findings. However, these findings were mostly put together between the period of 2001 and 2012. So all that I'm about to say to you right now is in the heyday of the post 9/11 world. This predates ISIS, okay? So there was another get the band back together sort of moment after 2015 when ISIS came onto the scene. And now with post October 7th world, there's been a third act to this. And I haven't seen a lot of great numbers for those things, but if we can assume that in this period of time that there was this much money and this much coordination, and many of these institutes and organizations and players are still active trying to spread and coordinate their hatred for Islam and their misrepresentation of Islam, then we can only assume that things have either stayed the same or perhaps even gotten worse, and that new characters and new organizations have arisen since then. But let's just get the basics. The structure of the anti-Islamic or the Islamophobic network is basically made up of foundations, especially family foundations, that funnel a lot of money to certain organizations. And those organizations are headed by or founded by or chaired by particular self-appointed experts that supposedly know everything that you need to know about Islam and how dangerous it is. That then is amplified by certain activists and influencers now in the social media realm, but also otherwise in-person events and things of that nature. And then these things become self-referential. So this is basically the construction of an echo chamber with pretty much the same dozen to 24 actors and institutes all referencing each other that attempt to achieve the perception that this is an undisputed reality, that Islam is about hatred and violence, and Islam is a threat to everybody.
The only real influence I had, Muslim influence, was from the TV or radio. 99% of that influence was negative. 9/11 also was widely televised and on the radio when I was growing up. And when you have information like that, they have a very lasting impression.
So let's look at this one at a time. Who are the top funders, at least as of 2012, and I'm sure many of them are still at the top as well, of this Islamophobia network? I'm only going to mention a few. By far, the biggest funder was a fund called Donors Capital Fund and Donors Trust, the two separate entities. Between 2001 and 2012, they donated $27 million to Islamophobic organizations. And by the way, if you want to know how big the industry is total between 2001 and 2012, the top 8 funders of Islamophobic organizations donated $57 million. So this is a huge amount of money that is spent in order to coordinate messaging, in order to lend credibility, in order to construct this fictitious reality that Islam somehow threatens the average person in the United States or, the United States as a whole. Now, double click on Donors Capital Fund. They made one particular donation in 2008. It was a one-person anonymous donation of $17 million to a project called the Clarion Project. Okay, what is the Clarion Project? We're going to talk about the Clarion Project a little bit more detail in a sec, but this 17 million one-time anonymous donation helped to pay for a DVD and a movie that was produced by the Clarion Project that was called Obsession: Radical Islam's War Against the West. Now, the timing of this, keep in mind, this is 2008-ish, and this was deployed to 28 million swing state voters. So imagine, it's 2008, the election is coming. Remember all of the conspiracy theories about Obama, right? Barack Hussein Obama, etc., Indonesia, madrasa. People were even reaching out to me from my extended family saying it's like, oh, he has this ring and he took it off for Ramadan. That means something, right? All this conspiracy theories. 28 million swing state voters were given this DVD for free. That's serious coordination, and that's serious organization. There's other foundations that were involved in similar projects, such as the Skyfa Foundations that donated $10 million during this period, the Lyndon Harry Bradley Foundation, and there's others. Okay, those are some of the big donors, but let's get involved in the projects and the organizations. The top organizations, we just mentioned the Clarion Project. The second organization, and arguably worse organization, is called the Middle East Forum. And you're going to notice that many of these organizations have very innocent and innocuous sounding names. So the Middle East Forum is a conservative think tank founded by Daniel Pipes in 1990. Who's Daniel Pipes? We're going to talk about it in a minute. According to the organization's website, its mission is to, quote, promote American interests in the Middle East and protect Western values from Middle Eastern threats. So one of the things that the Middle East Forum does, it has its own publication called the Middle East Quarterly, but more significantly, it has a network of monitoring organizations and programs. So Campus Watch, you've probably heard or run into Campus Watch after October 7th, Islamist Watch, and then later the Legal Project. All of these function to try to spread the fear of militant Islam and to monitor organizations and Muslim individuals, branding the Sharia and Muslims, and even the instruction of Arabic as affronts to American freedom. If you're familiar with the doxing organizations such as Canary Mission, Campus Watch and Canary Mission are always right there, 1 and 2. Middle East Forum is at the center of the Islamophobia network. They received, for example, since 2001, they received $12 million in funding from donors. This is 2001 to 2012. And it in turn turns around and donates funds to various other organizations in the Islamophobia network, such as American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Frank Gaffney's Center for Security Policy, Robert Spencer's Jihad Watch, and Stephen Emerson's Investigative Project on Terrorism. We're going to talk about more of them in more detail in just a minute. The next organization is the David Horowitz Freedom Center, founded in 1988 by David Horowitz. The Freedom Center promotes the myth that Muslim extremists have infiltrated an array of political organizations on both the left and the right. Jihad Watch, another monitoring group, is directed by Robert Spencer. It's also a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. It's built on the fear that there's some sort of Islamic crusade against the West. And if you've ever heard of the term Islamofascism, it's kind of out of favor now, but it used to be a thing. Islamofascism was one of the terms that was spread and popularized by this group, and they used to actually coordinate Islamofascism Awareness Week programs on hundreds of college campuses throughout the United States. They would actually coordinate with student organizations to host this week-long event and to provide speakers for it. The last organization we're going to talk about is the Center for Security Policy. Again, a very innocent, innocuous-sounding organization. It was founded in 1988 by Frank Gaffney. The Center for Security Policy is a nonprofit security conservative think tank, and a main driver of the creeping Sharia conspiracy theory. This idea that we're all just trying to infiltrate American society and force everybody to obey the Sharia. These are the organizations that are responsible for that. That's the organizations, and there's more, but we're just giving you the top offenders. Let's double click on the people, okay? Who are these people that we've mentioned now a few times here? We're going to separate these people into three main categories. Category one is we have the self-appointed experts. Category two is the validators. And category three are the activists and the influencers that are going around to amplify this to a larger audience. Number one, Daniel Pipes. Daniel Pipes is the founder and president of the Middle East Forum. Okay, we talked about some of their projects, such as Campus Watch. Now, what's interesting is that they were actually taken to court by the Islamic Center, I believe, of Boston. Yeah, Islamic Society of Boston, for slander and defamation because of their misrepresentation and their very, very willful smearing of Islam and Muslims. So what did they do? They came up with a new project called the Legal Project that was meant to insulate themselves from legal challenges, especially brought due to defamation lawsuits. Okay, let's go to somebody else. This David Horowitz person who founded the David Horowitz Freedom Center, he has said that Muslim American organizations, quote, are all fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood, and that 80% of U.S. mosques are filled with hate against Jews and Americans. He was invited to Brooklyn College in 2011 to give a speech, and in it he said that Middle Eastern Muslims are, quote, Islamic Nazis who, quote, want to kill Jews. That's their agenda, end quote. He added that all Muslim associations are fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood. You see the type of paranoia and honestly farcical argumentation that goes on from these types of groups. Thankfully, and we'll get to this in the end, many of these classic Islamophobes have been outed and exposed, but there's a new generation that is up and coming that needs to be watched. Next up, we have Frank Gaffney. Frank Gaffney is one of the lead engineers of the anti-Sharia movement, and he is the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy, that think tank that we mentioned before. Now, Center for Security Policy became really, really important and influential and significant with the what they called the Ground Zero Mosque in New York City. Recall that there was a mosque that was attempting to be built in New York City. This group started a website, stop911mosque.com, and they coordinated a smear campaign essentially against the local Muslim community in order to try to prevent the mosque from being built. That was the Park 51 Community Center. Next up, we have David Yerushalmi. He is the legal architect and legal cover for many of these groups. He's somebody who, one of his organizations proposed legislation in 2007, get this, to make adherence to the Sharia a felony punishable by 20 years in prison. So you can see all of what he's about. Now, he has served as legal counsel for Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller's group, which is called Stop Islamization of America. And he has also taken on people as clients who, for example, burnt Qur'ans, such as Pastor Terry Jones. He's also represented the Thomas More Law Center, which is their mission statement says that they want to defend and promote America's Judeo-Christian heritage and moral values. Most significantly, probably, Yerushalmi's contribution to the Islamophobic network and activity was his authoring of the anti-Sharia legislation. So he came up with a template legislation that has now been introduced in more than 30 states in the United States. It's nonsensical, right? It's like the Sharia is like also how I wash myself to pray, and me eating halal meat, and me getting married in a certain way, and burial rights, etc. But because of the plausibility structure that has been achieved by the Islamophobic network, then he was able to capitalize on that and get these anti-Sharia legislations passed. So enforcement is like, well, how could you possibly enforce that? That doesn't make any sense. And there, of course, are no similar restrictions for Jews or other groups of faith that want to follow their religious laws. But the point is that he's the one who organized the template and then spread it so that people used this anti-Sharia legislation in order to make their way into state legislatures along the country. Just a couple more figures. We have Robert Spencer. He is the co-founder of Stop Islamicization of America. He's also the director of Jihad Watch. It's a subsidiary of the Freedom Center, which we already talked about. Their research, quote, is regarding the current state of radical jihad theology and ideology. He's got several books that he's written, such as The Post-American Presidency about Obama. The subtitle is The Obama Administration's War on America. He's also a longtime collaborator with activist Pamela Geller. We'll mention her in a second. But you see that Spencer is one of the primary drivers in promoting the myth that there is no such thing as peaceful Islam. There is no such thing as moderate Islam. That Islam is only a religion, or even if that, an ideology of hate and violence. As he said himself, quote, "Of course, as I have pointed out many times, traditional Islam itself is not moderate or peaceful." Last up, we have Steve Emerson. Steve Emerson, and he's one of the more discredited figures in the Islamophobic circles. He's the founder and executive director of the Investigative Project on Terrorism, which claims to be one of the world's largest storehouses of archival data and intelligence on Islamic and Middle Eastern terrorist groups. So you'll see a pattern here is that in the wake of 9/11, there were a whole bunch of grifters who asserted themselves into the space and said, hey, listen, you guys have a terrorism problem. I'm here to solve it. I know everything about terrorism. I know everything about the Middle East. I know everything about Islam. Listen to me and I will show you how to fight this. Of course, they used that and exploited it, sometimes just for petty, selfish financial gains, like in the case of Steve Emerson, and other times for ideological projects, which we'll talk about as well. So according to Emerson, he and his staff frequently provide briefings to U.S. government and law enforcement agencies. We'll talk about that as well. In addition to members of Congress and congressional committees. So you see people like Emerson and all of these figures, Frank Gaffney and Pipes, brought in front of Congress to testify and explain to them what is Islam and what it's not, what is jihad and what it's not, what are these Muslim groups doing and what they're not. They have zero credentials. They're complete fakes, complete phonies, complete liars. But because they make the most noise and they're backed by big money, they have been able to insert themselves as the gatekeepers and the holders of the narrative when it comes to many of these things, and thus how Muslims are treated in the United States. Emerson frames Islam as inherently violent and antagonistic. He fabricates evidence, perpetuates conspiracy theories of Muslims infiltrating.
The discussion I had, the larger discussion, was about radical Islamic militancy in Europe. Right. And I made a terrible, inexcusable error in identifying Birmingham as a no-go. You can
get that information from? But where did you get that information from? Sorry to interrupt you. Where did you get that information from that Birmingham was a no-go zone for anyone who wasn't a Muslim, for a Jew or a Christian?
It was on sloppy research that had not been fact-checked. And I can only tell you that it was a mistake that I had committed. My body of work speaks for itself for the last 25 years.
So there you go. That's his view on Islam. Now, what I find particularly interesting is that this core group of anti-Islamic, Islamophobic bigots that spread very clear, like anybody who has now, alhamdulillah, with more democratization of media and information, many people can see through these people's lies, okay, and see the complete lack of expertise or knowledge or familiarity with anything, with Islam, with Arabic, with the Middle East, with Muslims, with anything. However, what makes it more believable is the second class of people, the validators, the people who I would liken to Qarun, right? Qarun, if you remember in Surah Al-Qasas, is actually part of Bani Israel. He, according to Ibn Kathir, is the first cousin of Musa alayhi salam. Now, Qarun, known as Korah in the Bible, was the overseer. He was the one that Pharaoh paid and hired and employed to crack the whip and keep the children of Israel in line and to keep the followers of Moses in line. You wonder how he got so much wealth, so much money that it took several men to carry the keys to his treasures? That's how. He was the biggest sellout. So he was someone that was from the community, supposedly, but was paid enough to sell out his principles and his people in order to, give plausible deniability. If someone wanted to say, hey, Pharaoh, you're, pretty racist against, or you're pretty, bigoted against these children of Israel, he could say, what are you talking about? I work very closely with Qarun. He's from Bani Israel. He's from the children of Israel. I have no hatred towards them at all. I just don't like the bad ones, right? And this is the same move that the anti-Islamic crowd and network, they play. So they have carefully selected certain people that are maybe, inshallah, who knows, Muslims or former Muslims or people from the Middle East or people who are Arab that lend credibility to their narrative. So we're going to go through some of these, as Kerr has called some of them, sock puppets. And I would say that they tap dance for the Islamophobic network. One of them is Zuhdi Jasser. Jasser is an outspoken supporter of Israel and believes that Muslim organizations and leaders need to be held to a litmus test to see whether they recognize Israel as a state. If you recognize Israel as a state, then you're a good Muslim, you're a moderate Muslim, you're okay. If you don't recognize Israel as a state, then you're probably a terrorist. That's what Zuhdi Jasser is saying. So the latest clip that's going around with Tucker Carlson and Matt Walsh, both of them are extremists because I think Matt Walsh said that Israel doesn't even exist. The next validator is Walid Shobat. Now he's a fake ex-militant, so he put on this identity like he used to be a militant. People have dug through his history. They found it to be completely not credible. He happens to be a Zionist now, very convenient. And he recommended that Muslims be monitored and that the government tap their phones. Next up, we have Walid Faris. And Walid Faris is, again, touted as an authentic expert on Muslims and political Islam. Now, despite, get this, being a former militiaman, he was a member of a militia, and he used to be a foreign affairs spokesperson for the mostly Christian Lebanese front. If you know anything about the history of Sham, that the Lebanese front was the militia responsible for the Sabra and Shatila massacres of Muslims. So he went from being a terrorist himself, or at least dining with terrorists and being responsible for horrible brutality during the Lebanese civil war, quote unquote, in 1982, to being this expert on political Islam and Muslims and the danger of Muslims to society. Wow. What a grift. Next up, we have Noni Darwish. Noni Darwish is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. She's also founder and director of Former Muslims United and founder and president of Arabs for Israel. Gee, wow. Darwish is Egyptian or of Egyptian origin and was raised in Gaza. So this is important. Why am I mentioning this? Because, folks, as we have a saying in the street, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Just because someone looks like you, speaks the same language as you, has a similar name as you, it doesn't mean that they represent your values. They could be a Qarun. They could be a Korah. They could sell out their values and do so in a way that endangers you and throws your whole community under the bus in order just for a grift or a cheap gain. She also said Islam is a poison to society. It's divisive. It's hateful. Islam is going to be brought down because Islam is based on lies and it's not based on the truth. Darwish speaks at many Stop Islamicization of America rallies, so she's brought out to tap dance when it comes to Pamela Geller's group and these other groups, and she validates these views through her books. They Call Me Infidel, Why I Renounced Jihad for America, Israel and the War on Terror, and Cruel and Usual Punishment, the Terrifying Global Implication of Islamic Law. These books are endorsed and supported by Daniel Pipes, Robert Spencer, David Horowitz. You see the grift here. You see how this is very, very self-referential. Now, she was also featured as an expert on radical Islam in the Clarion Project's fear-mongering documentary that we mentioned earlier, Obsession, Radical Islam's War Against the West. So whenever you need a token expert, self-appointed expert on Islam and radical Islam and political Islamism, whatever, you bring these people out to tap dance. There's a whole lot more on that, but we need to skip to our last one for the sake of time. Tawfiq Hamid is the chair of the study of Islamic radicalism at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. And we're just going to leave a quote from him on the table here. I have to agree with Robert Spencer that moderate Islam does not exist. So you see, with this type of people who are brought out to tap dance to show that, yes, these Islamophobes are onto something. Here's people who are from the area. They speak the language. They have similar names, right? They used to be Muslims sometimes, maybe. That this lends credibility, this film or this filter of validators lends credibility to the people who are peddling in these lies and fabrications. Of course, they make quite a bit of money off of these things through book deals and speaker tours and engagements. And we'll talk about an example of that later. The final group of people we'll call the activists, but there's a little bit of overlap between the activists / influencers and the validators. So people such as Pamela Geller, people like Ayan Hirsi Ali, and people like Bridget Gabriel. Gabriel's an interesting one because she's a Lebanese Christian. So again, she's from the area, so she really knows. She's the token expert. She travels the country giving talks about how she endured persecution in Lebanon as a Christian at the hands of radical Muslim terrorists. She says, quote, every practicing Muslim who believes in the teaching of the Quran cannot be a loyal citizen to the United States of America. She also says that Americans must unite to, quote, defeat radical Islam, and explains that any tolerance towards Islam will allow for the destruction of Western society. Now, these are sort of older figures. There's been some newer ones that have risen up recently. One of the most prominent ones is Amy Meckelberg. And Amy Meckelberg, if you've been following what's been going on, is responsible for drawing a lot of scrutiny towards the Epic City project that Epic Mosque in Texas was planning to build. She has a group that she founded called, get this, Resistance Against Islamic Radicals. Now, that was a little bit too in your face, so they've since rebranded and changed the acronym to be something a little bit more innocent sounding. She tweets many, many times a day, and she tried to ping and reference the governor of Texas and other people in Texas to stir up hatred and suspicion about this particular community that was about to arise, and now it's in the courts, and we're going to see what's going to play out. But this is the idea, that this is a coordinated effort. These people reference each other. These people stand to gain financially. It's not just people being innocently misinformed, that this is a very, very well-coordinated outfit. Now, let's talk about the strategy of what we can do as Muslims, especially Muslims in the United States of America, to push back, which actually we have been pushing back for a while, and props to CARE and the Center for American Progress and all the organizations that helped expose these networks and these individuals and these organizations, especially starting around 2011, 2012, and now that people are starting to see through it. And especially, and we'll talk about it, in the age of democratic media, or at least a little bit more democratic media in social media, we see that people are able to see through the lies more often, or they have a greater propensity to, even if there are a lot of misinformation out there. So number one, what's the strategy to combat these people? Number one, you have to expose the network, and you have to expose the grift. Don't ever let it go unmentioned that this is a coordinated effort with big money and interests behind it. The average typical American does not like to be fooled. We have this mythology in the United States that everybody thinks that they're middle class or, working class or something like that. Even people who are very well off, sometimes they like to believe that they're part of this bootstrap, like go out and work, and it's all about your hard work, self-determination. This is part of the American mythos. Americans hate to feel like they're being taken advantage of, especially by big money. It has to be in everyone's face that this is not just innocent information, that you're being provoked deliberately by big moneyed interests and a very coordinated campaign to distract you for other things or to get your donation money. Now, as an example, I want to show you what the grift looks like. So let's take this one Walid Shobat, okay? Remember the fake militant. He used to be supposedly a militant, but he's not really. 2011, Shobat told an audience of 300 South Dakota police officers that all Islamic organizations in America should be the #1 enemy.
All Islamist organizations in America should be the #1 enemy.
He goes around giving talks like this to police, to FBI, to universities, anybody that will have him. He's the author of a book, Why We Want to Kill You. So he's pretending to be a Muslim in order to get this. He gave lectures to the Air Force Academy. Listen to this. CNN reported that Shobat's earnings from his book and video sales and his speaking engagements to law enforcement groups and others totaled more than $500,000 in 2009.
Fascinating report about your tax dollars going into the pocket of a man who claims to have unique insight on terrorism because he used to be a terrorist, Walid Shobat. But keeping him honest tonight, we're discovering that Walid Shobat's story just doesn't seem to add up.
Being a terrorism expert has become a cottage industry since 9/11. The Department of Homeland Security has spent nearly $40 million on counterterrorism training just since 2006. DHS doesn't keep records on how much is spent just on speakers. But some of the so-called experts who go around the country teaching, and in some cases preaching, about terrorism and the dangers of Islam are not quite what they seem. People, it turns out, like Walid Shobat.
This guy just completely lying. $500,000. That's the grift. That all of these people, they go and they speak and they have their books, they have their videos, they have their engagements, they talk to law enforcement, they talk to the armed forces, they talk to FBI, and that they get paid very, very handsomely for it. You have to expose the grift, and you also have to realize that even though a lot of these figures are now getting discredited in the public sphere, that when it comes to local police academies and local law enforcement agencies, these people still have a lot of influence and a lot of play. The FBI has gone away from some of the most problematic things that it was doing when it came to its instruction. That's another story, and we're not saying that they're out of the woods by far when it comes to their profiling and their anti-Islamic sentiment within the FBI, but we're saying that at the national level, there were some changes that were made. Often at the local level, when there's less familiarity and less exposure, some of these groups eat this stuff up, and they will bring the same old Islamophobic network speakers to train them about how to deal with jihadism or how to deal with political Islam and this sort of nonsense. It's very, very lucrative. So one, expose the grift and expose the network and expose how coordinated and well-funded these campaigns are. And two, try to influence your local law enforcement agencies to see how are they getting trained on this stuff. Do they have a counterterrorism unit? Do they have units that are basically just, eating up all of this Islamophobic material? And how can we push back against that and change it and replace it? And the last thing I'll say is to see this as an opportunity. Okay, that every test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to us is an opportunity for something greater. That this is a tremendous opportunity for grassroots dawah, and we as Muslims in the United States are here for dawah. We are here to invite people to Islam and to clarify what it is. We're also here to demonstrate our goodwill to people, that as individuals that are part of the society, we want what is best for people. That means that we want the best for your dunya, your worldly life, but we also want what's best for your afterlife. And so we have to connect to people on the ground. We need a ground game. We have to contribute to society. We have to build institutions that are not just insular, but also reach across the aisle and add value to the communities around us. That a good ground game will always beat out big money and big influence when they are full of lies. So we hope that this deep dive into the Islamophobic network was of use to you. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us clarity and to grant the people and societies around us clarity and to let the truth always prevail. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran that falsehood is bound to perish and the truth will prevail. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.